All
Hello,
right.
everybody. Um, so my name is Assaf Katz, and with me is Muna and Dr. Gabor Mate, and we are very, very happy to have managed to have this meeting. Worked a lot for it, and we are very happy to see so many people joining. I will say maybe a few words about me. I'll pass it on to Muna, and then pass it on to Gabo for the beginning of the discussion. So my name is Assaf Katz. I'm Israeli, living in Israel, a meditation teacher and a peace activist. And lately, after having a Zoom meeting with a Dharma teacher called Tara Brach, Tara Brach, she mentioned that we should invite Gabor Mate for an interview. And I'm very happy to say that very, very quickly you agreed to have the meeting, and we had a pre-meeting which was very productive and interesting for me. So I'm very happy to have you with us. And this meeting will be mostly just an interview, a discussion between the three of us. If anybody has a question, I ask you to send the question either to me, you can do it in Hebrew or English, or to Mona, and not to the whole group, and not to Gabo as well. So just to me or to Mona. So hope we have a very productive meeting. We'll have about an hour and a bit for the meeting. Okay, passing it to Mona.
Thank you, Assaf. So I'm Muna Shaheen. I'm a Palestinian living in Haifa, and I've been listening to Dr. Gabor Mate for a long time. I'm really, really very honored to be here with you. Thank you for responding and willing to do this interview tonight. Yeah, I'm also very impressed by the presence of people. I'm happy to see that there's a mix of both Arab and Jewish names. So this is really, I'm very happy to see this. I'm looking forwards to discover what's gonna come tonight. So thank you for that. And I think I'll just say again in Arabic. إذا في أي أسئلة اللي بدكم تسألوها ممكن تكتبوا لي على الشخصي. أوكي، بتلاقوا الاسم تبعي بتكتبوا على الشخصي أسئلة اللي بدكم تطرحوها. اللقاء الليلي راح يكون بالأساس محادثة بين إحنا الثلاثة. فمع إنه أغلب الظن بس عم بفكر إنه يمكن يترجم هذا الإشي. So thank you so much. Passing it to you, Dr. Gabor.
Unmute yourself.
You're muted still.
Okay, now I'm not muted anymore.
Yeah.
All right. So again, thank you for inviting me, Muna and Asaf, and for all of you for joining us. I begin by saying that I have no special authority to talk about Israel-Palestine. None. Nobody does. And the reason nobody does is because for all the intellectual positions and all the historical facts and all the arguments and all the perspectives that we may express, underlying it for all of us is an emotional stance. And people's emotional stance, how they relate to the world, how they relate to themselves, pretty much determines how they're going to relate to this issue. So that facts themselves don't persuade anybody. In this particular discussion over Israel-Palestine I've been involved in it since I was a teenager. And my experience is that people rarely allow their opinions to be influenced by the facts. It's mostly how do you feel emotionally about something? And so that even the experts from that point of view are not experts. You can have PhDs, you can have degrees, you can have experiences and things and see the situation totally differently based on what your emotional stance is, which doesn't mean that it's hopeless. It doesn't mean that we have to pay a lot of attention as to where our emotions are guiding us and how we actually feel in our bodies when we discuss this issue. Now, I am Jewish. That doesn't give me special authority to talk about this issue because there's a lot of Jews who don't agree with me. I'm an ex-Zionist. That doesn't give me special authority because lots of ex-Zionists are still Zionists. As an infant, I survived the Holocaust. Being a survivor doesn't give me special authority. Otherwise, every survivor would see it the same way, but obviously we don't. I'll tell you what being Jewish, a survivor, and an ex-Zionist does give me, which doesn't make me right. It doesn't make necessarily right, but it does give me something. It means that I understand. I have been totally inside. I used to believe in, I used to articulate, argue for, vociferously, fervently hold the Zionist perspective. I could argue it in my sleep. And if I don't anymore, and if I come to see things differently, it's because I've seen a different side of reality that I didn't see then. And one thing I can tell you is most people that I discuss with or debate with, I know their point of view. I know it before they even say it. I could say it for them. They usually don't know where I'm coming from. They haven't looked at the material, the evidence, the information that I've looked at. That doesn't make me right, but it does mean that I do understand, seen, as best I can tell you, all sides of it. Again, that doesn't make me automatically right. Now, I can tell you something. There's a man called Yanis Varoufakis, who's the former finance minister of Greece. And he said on a YouTube interview recently, and I talked to him not long ago, he said that since October the 7th, he can't concentrate on anything else. All he can think about is October 7th and its aftermath in Gaza. And you know what? That's largely been my experience as well. I go to sleep with this issue on my mind and I wake with it, to the extent that I have to work at letting go of it. I have to really meditate and notice in myself to what extent this suffering is preoccupying all my attention and my emotional energies. Sometimes in a healthy way and sometimes in a not healthy way. Where does that go back to for me? I was 11 years old when I first really found out about the Holocaust. I've talked about this before. I knew that my grandparents were killed. I knew something about my experience with my mother, but I don't think very much. As an infant in Budapest under the Nazis. But when I was 11, I found a book on my parents' shelf called The Scourge of the Swastika by a British author called Russell, and he was one of the prosecutors or lawyers at Nuremberg. And that's the first book published in the 50s that detailed the Nazi crimes. I wasn't supposed to read that at age 11, but I climbed up on a chair, brought the book down. I started to read it. I looked at the photographs of naked Jews, women, men, children being massacred in Russia by the SS troops or their local surrogates. I was 11 then. And for years afterwards, I'm speaking literally now, my head would spin. Once a day, my head would spin. And I'd say, how is this possible? 6 million people. How is this possible? And ever since then, I've been concerned with how is human suffering possible? How can people do this to each other? How to understand it and how to prevent it. And that's been my life's work. That doesn't make me right. I'm just giving you my personal history. Zionism then for me, when I was a teenager, was the answer. it would redeem Jewish history. It would be the answer to the anti-Semitic threat. It would be a way of finding dignity and meaning and purpose and community. I'm very grateful for that, for those Zionist years of my life, because they reconnected me to Jewishness in a very positive way. And I read a lot of Jewish history. I read histories of Israel, Palestine, of course, all from a Zionist perspective. And then something happened. And I began to see that beautiful dream. There was a parallel nightmare. Okay, that beautiful dream was achieved at the cost of a nightmare that was
You can go on.
at cost of a nightmare that was imposed on the local population. I'm going to stop speaking in about 2 minutes. I'm just going to read you two things. Sometimes I'm accused of using anti-Zionist sources. No, all the sources I used, the Israeli historians on whose work I partially, not completely, rely, used to be Zionists, like me. If they changed, there must have been a reason for it. I'm going to read you just briefly from two of them. One of them is still a Zionist. This one is not. This is Benjamin Bet Halami, in his book, Israeli historian, in his book Original Sins, Reflections on the History of Zionism and Israel. And he says, there's clearly no need to justify the Zionist dream, the desire for relief from Jewish suffering. Nobody can fault the idea of improving the lot of the oppressed Jews of Europe in the 19th century. Zionism, at the abstract level of an idea of Jewish sovereignty and territorial concentration, cannot be faulted, he says. We can ask whether it's practical, but we cannot fault its morality. The trouble with Zionism starts when it lands, so to speak, in Palestine. What has to be justified is the injustice to the Palestinians caused by Zionism, the dispossession and victimization of a whole people. There's clearly a wrong here, a wrong which creates the need for justification. And then he quotes a young kibbutz member at the Arab village of Kibbutz Sasa that was founded in 1948 after they expelled the local population. And this kibbutz member during Passover writes, why are we celebrating a holiday in an Arab village? Once there was an Arab village here. People had shoes, they had clothes, they had lands. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph. The issue today is no longer what happened then. If only what happened then had happened then and it was no longer happening, there'd be no problem. The problem is continuing to happen. The dispossession is continuing. The suppression of the local history is continuing. You can go to Eastern Europe, where I'm from, and you can go to Ukraine, you can go to Slovakia, you can go to Romania, you can go to Hungary, Czechia, Poland, and go to villages and not know that Jews used to live there. Not know that there used to be Jewish graveyards and Jewish schools and synagogues. You can go to Israel and not know that Arabs ever used to live there in many villages, that there used to be graveyards and schools and mosques. And that's continuing, people, whether you know it or not. It's continuing. Nobody's arguing against history. I live in Canada. Canada There was a suppression, partial elimination, and hundreds of years of oppression of the indigenous population. Nobody's arguing that Canada should not exist, or the Canadians should go back to Europe. But there's an ongoing struggle to ensure justice for the indigenous people here in Canada that still continues. In the same way, there's no argument from me that because of what happened in 1948, therefore, Jews have no right to be there. But they have no right to continue what they're doing. The continued oppression, occupation, destruction of homes, torture, jailings, burning down of olive trees. That's going on. And then when we come to October 7th and we wonder, how is this horror possible? Well, the question is not how is it possible, but how come it took so long? And a lot, which is not justify anything. You know, people say, justifying Hamas. No, I'm not. I don't justify any killings of innocent civilians on either side, ever. But where did it come from? I'll finish with this. This is the Zionist historian Benny Morris, who says in an interview in Haaretz in 2002, talking about his history of 1948, what the new material shows is that there were far more Israeli acts of massacre than I had previously thought. To my surprise, there were also many cases of rape. In the months of April, May 1948, units of the Haganah were given operational orders that stated explicitly that they were to uproot the villagers, expel them, and destroy the villages themselves. This is somebody who believes in the necessity of that. You know what he says? There's no justification for acts of rape. There's no justification for acts of massacre. Those are war crimes, he says. But in certain conditions, expulsion is not a war crime. I don't think that the expulsions of 1948 were war crimes. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. You have to dirty your hands. Ben-Gurion was right. If he had not done what he did, that state would not have come into being. That has to be clear. It is impossible to evade it. Without the uprooting of the Palestinians, a Jewish state would not have arisen here. So says a historian who believes that the expulsions were justified. And now the question is, how are the Palestinians supposed to feel about that? What are they supposed to do about it when it's continuing? That's my point of view. Doesn't make me right, but I want to explain where personally I came from and what my historical perspective is. That's who you're talking to. Just one more thing and then I'll stop. I've been told that my speaking promotes anti-Semitism. Well, there's a saying that it's too ridiculous to be taken seriously and too serious to be ridiculous. Really? Really? Think about that one. The whole world, not the whole world, actually most of the world, I don't know about most of the world. Most people in North America are much more concerned about who won the Super Bowl than what's going on in Israel, Palestine, Gaza. But people who care about such things, people of conscience, people who are alive, a lot of people carry a lot of heaviness in their hearts these days. There's a lot of heaviness in the world, not just on the part of Jews, not just on the part of Muslims or Palestinians, but just ordinary people who feel the deep heaviness around what's been going on for the last 4 or 5 months. And what we have here in North America, and I'll confess to something, sometimes my heart has been hardened against the Jewish suffering. Honest to God, it has. I just don't want to hear about it anymore. That's a part of me. I'm not proud of it. I'm not arguing for it. I'm just telling you about a reaction on my part. And the reason is because for decades, I've watched the Palestinians suffering. And I've been to the occupied territories, including just less than 2 years ago, working with women tortured in Israeli jails. And it's made me so angry. There's such rage in me that I have to be aware of. And sometimes I've not been sensitive enough to the Jewish suffering. I admit that. But at the same time, when the world watches what's going on in Gaza, the death of 12,000 children, 12,000 children, children having their limbs amputated without anesthetic. Imagine your limb being amputated without anesthetic. And then to have the major Jewish organizations and all the media justify all this. Now, what do you think supports anti-Semitism? All the Jews and the Jewish leaders supporting all this? Or do you think it's that some Jews and some Israelis who speak out against it? What do you think supports anti-Jewish sentiment? If all the Jews were united in their support, or if the world sees that, like every other people, we have our differences, and that we don't all support what the whole world, much of the world, sees as a horror that takes place every day. Thank you for listening. I hope I haven't talked for too long.
Thank you. Mona, do you have something coming to your mind?
I'm trying to follow the questions here that are being sent, but generally speaking, before I attend to that, I have listening today to previous conversations with you, Dr. Gabor, and just thinking about this, what you just mentioned about being accused of being anti-Semitic. It's just, for me, I find this really interesting to look at the, to observe the fact that whenever you say something that negates what people believe in, their core beliefs, then they tend to immediately go into like certain square, or I don't know how to, like they categorize you in a place, and then there's like some kind of, shutting down that doesn't enable people to listen fully to the truth. So when we invited people to listen here, this is what we said actually, that sometimes the truth is inconvenient to listen to, but let's listen to the whole storyline. And I'm just thinking about what, like this fear, I imagine this fear is so tremendous for people being attached to their identity and attached to what they want to believe in, that it makes it really hard, that once you say a word, it kind of immediately takes them into, okay, they're attacking me. So did you have anything to say about that particularly, maybe?
Yeah, the idea of, I'm not accused of anti-Semitism. I'm accused of being a self-hating Jew who
Sorry, yes.
who foments anti-Semitism. And it was very interesting. The first one to raise that argument was Abba Ibn. And Abba Ibn was a very Oxford-educated diplomat, Israel's representative at the United Nations, very smooth-spoken, very articulate, hyper-intelligent. And he said that how we counter the arguments against our position is by pointing out that those who are not Jews who criticize Israel are anti-Semites, and those Jews who criticize Israel are self-haters. And he first applied this to two outstanding Jewish figures, Noam Chomsky, who himself is Jewish and used to live in Israel, and Izzy Stone, I.F. Stone, a great Jewish journalist who covered 1948. And these were the first self-hating Jews. So what I find is that when people hear these perspectives that really upset them, rather than saying, it really upsets me to hear you say this, and I don't understand why you're saying it, it confuses me and troubles me. It makes me very angry. They have to call you a name. They have to categorize you. They have to dismiss you. Because obviously, if I'm a self-hating Jew, well, that explains everything I've just said. If I'm a self-hating Jew, you don't have to look at what happened in 1948. You don't have to look at what happened in 1947. If I'm a self-hating Jew, you don't have to look at what's happening in the West Bank right now. If I'm a self-hating Jew, you don't have to look at what's happening in Gaza right now. Now, I can't prove that I'm not a self-hating Jew. You can't prove something like that. But it's so convenient, isn't it? And so rather than deal with the content of what I'm saying, or even the intention, because I'm telling you, even if the content that I'm giving you is incorrect, I don't believe it is, but if it is, I'm open to hearing it. What's the intention? I just want justice. I want justice for Jews. I want justice for Palestinians. That's the intention. That doesn't make me right, but it also doesn't make me wrong. And as soon as you categorize me as an anti-Semite or anybody else, or as a self-hating Jew, you don't have to deal with anything. Now you're comfortable. And Muna, you mentioned identification, identity. Identification comes from the Latin word idem, which means the same, and facere, which means to make. So when you identify with something, you make yourself the same as something. Our identification are very dangerous things. It's very interesting. Martin Niemöller was a Protestant pastor, minister in Germany. And he was a U-boat captain in the First World War in the German army. He began to oppose Nazism not because the Nazis started to attack religion. He's the one who made that famous statement about, first they came from the communists, but I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. And then they came from the labor unionists, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a labor unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing because I wasn't Jewish. Then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak for me. Now, Martin Niemöller said that. He was in jail when the Second World War broke out, and he wrote a letter to Hitler volunteering to serve in the Navy again, which is remarkable. Because here was this moral person committed to justice in jail, but when war broke out, he completely identified with his country. Well, that identification is showing up all the time right now. There are a lot of really good people who've been in favor of justice for a long time. But when a war breaks out, they just identify, I'm the same as. I'm telling you, people, I don't know, I don't identify as a Canadian. If that means that I can't criticize Canada for the way it treats its Indigenous people, I don't identify as a Jew. If that means going along with what the so-called Jewish state does, careful about your identifications. I'm not saying don't identify, but if you do it really consciously. Otherwise, when you make yourself the same as, then that thing that's being criticized that you made yourself the same as gets criticized, then you take it personally and you lose your capacity for rationality. Identification is a dangerous thing. And Assaf, you're a meditator, certainly a lot of the work of Buddhist meditation and Buddhist psychology is to disidentify, isn't it?
And maybe I can say something about this. When we corresponded in the beginning, just inviting you, you wrote that you're not a meditator, you're a truth seeker, seeking the truth. And I think I told you that I value it a lot more.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here, I'm trying to understand what is important for me. And for me, inviting you, before just inviting you, we got a lot of responses. I think both Muna and me, a lot of responses. And this morning I thought, I don't understand. Like, why does it trigger so many people? Because when I spoke to you, I felt that very clearly, in a way, a choice is not political, it's a human choice. You see suffering and you want to relieve it. And at the same time, you're not... the fact that you want to relieve suffering doesn't mean that it's all fluffy and fuzzy. It means that you see the root, that you, as a truth seeker, you look for the root cause. And you say, this is the root cause that needs to be changed. That would lead to the end of suffering. For me, it's what I said now is kind of also the basic way of how I understand Buddhism and meditation. Like, if you really want to relieve suffering, you need to understand what is happening. And I find it's very hard these days. The mass suffering, the mass massacre, it's hard to stay true. And being Israeli, I can see this identification rising now very strongly, and it's very difficult to deal with. And I feel the sincerity of being a truth seeker is something which I very, very much value. And this is why I asked for your voice. And somehow, maybe my question is, how do you, also as a therapist, but just as a human being, can see the way to look through identity and look beyond it? Because so it's grasping the being in a way. So how can you look through it and stay true to something which is beyond, and I think which is actually the source of the liberation of us as human beings. So if you have something to say about this.
Thank you. First of all, I understand why people get triggered by me speaking on this subject. But before I go there and before I answer your question, let me say a word about this word triggering. I've often said this before. I teach it to my students. Trigger. Trigger is a metaphor, isn't it? It comes from a weapon. Now, how big a part of the weapon is the trigger? This big. For the trigger to set something off, there has to be ammunition there. There has to be an explosive charge. So when I get triggered, I can focus on the external thing that triggered me, or can look at what's the explosive charge within me? What's the ammunition that I'm carrying? That's the Buddhist way of looking at it, actually. It's also the only sensible way of looking at it. So if you trigger, because the way I speak, look for the explosive in yourself. That's my advice. It's also my advice to myself when I get triggered. That's the first point. The second point is, look, people internationally love my work. Millions of people, I know this. I'm finally starting to get it. That my work has had a huge impact out there in the world. I can't go to an airport almost anywhere in the world, or walk down the street in Jerusalem or London, and not have somebody come up to me to thank me for my work. So, by the way, my work is always based on doing my own thinking, not accepting the mainstream point of view, and doing my own research. If I come to a different conclusion about addiction or stress and health or child development or ADHD or trauma or anything else, it's because I've done the work of looking beyond the mainstream point of view. That doesn't make me right, but it gives my work power. And it's made a difference to a lot of people. So for a lot of people, for this figure that has been so important in their lives, and they tell me this, all of a sudden, to say these strange things about Israel and Palestine, it seems puzzling. It's painful. It's like the good father has let them down, or the good brother or the good uncle has betrayed them. Doesn't all of a sudden, he seems to have understood them, and all of a sudden he doesn't understand them. So that's why people get triggered. If somebody else was saying it, who they don't respect and love so much, they would not get so triggered. They would disagree, but they would not get so triggered. Okay, now, I confess, Assaf, that in beginning to answer your question, I forgot your question. Can you state the question again?
Yeah, maybe my question is seeing how strong identity grabs the being, and staying true to wishing for the end of suffering beyond self-identity or narrow self-identity. How do you see it happen? Like seeing it so profound now everywhere.
Yeah. In 1954, there was the World Football, real football, not what the Americans call football, but what the rest of the world call it. Because, the Americans call it football, and the foot hardly even touches the ball, but real football, And there was the World Championship, and Hungary was the best team in the world. I was a Hungarian. I was 10 years old. We had the best team in the world. We beat everybody for 3 years. Nobody beat us. And then we lost the finals of the World Championship to the Germans. Oh my God, it was a day of national mourning in Hungary. You know something? I've never got over it. It still bothers me. When I replay that game in my mind, what was it? It was just played on the football field. So what? Somebody scored more goals than somebody else did. But I was so identified with that team that even 70 years later, it bugs me. Now, people are identified. People make themselves the same as their past. There's been a lot of Jewish suffering. people identify with that suffering. It was only very recently that I had the experience, I'm talking about my personal life, that I can acknowledge the suffering in my and in my family and not be identified with it. Not let it define my present. Not that I forget about it, deny it, or minimize it, but I don't let it define me. I'm not just this person who suffered and whose family suffered. I can be present. So one of the essentials of, I don't claim to be an enlightened person. I've not had enlightenment experiences of unity and God and oneness and peace and love. I mean, honest to God, I know people who have, but I haven't. I'm not even sure. Doesn't matter. But what I do know is that every time I let go of an identification, the more free I become. And this happens in my marriage. When I get identified with a certain dynamic, a certain part of me, or a certain point of view, or a certain way of looking at my partner, my dear partner of 57 years, who some days I can hate. So identified do I become in a certain aspect of my experience? Liberation is a constant process of disidentification. And that means noticing when you're identified. Now, how do you notice when you're identified? Let me tell you. You know how you notice? Check your body. How much tension, tightness is in your chest and your belly? What's your body posture? How much peace in your heart?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to say that
كنت أحكي
the main work
يعني الشغل الأساسي
is to notice our identifications. Just notice it. Notice it in your mind and notice it in your
إنك
body.
تشوف.
That's the main work. And I got to do that many times a day, even on this issue, or especially on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you for this very, very deep insight about this. And I'm really, like taking in what you said about doing our own work first, like, and not walking with the stream. I think this is really core because I think that this is a lot of what's happening right now, that they're like right here in this place, there are like two groups and people just are separating and very few people doing the integral work of going out of the stream and really looking in a sober way at the situation, willing to look at the truth in the whole thing. And I'm finding that few things. I'm just gathering a few questions that have been asked and I'll phrase them in a minute. But I just want to say that as a Palestinian living here in Haifa, there's a very big guilt feeling of having, like on one hand being silenced so strongly, and then on the other hand not being able to do anything, somehow also comfortably numb, and I actually heard one thing that someone said that I really appreciated. I found it's funny, but it's so true also, that someone said that from the river to the sea, we all have PTSD, like we're all just traumatized right here. And the question is like, how do you start to heal this trauma to begin with? Like, where do you begin? This is so huge. What's happening is so big. It's really beyond anything we really managed to see. So let me just continue the phrasing, because there are a few questions here. So this is one aspect of it. one said like, so what is the right thing to do? What is the right action under this situation? And another question was from a Palestinian woman saying, as a Palestinian, how do I start to tackle this collective post-traumatic situation and get out of the stream of the trauma that is leading us, apparently where it is leading us? How do I start working with that? How do we start to dissolve this? This is just so huge.
Well, first of all, I'm in no position to tell anybody else what to do.
Yet we're talking to you, yeah.
If you're a Palestinian in Israel and you have some guilt about your helplessness to support your fellow Palestinians who are being killed right now in Gaza and starved, I would ask you to investigate that guilt. What is that really all about?
Yeah.
Because the reality is that if you're Palestinian in Israel and you speak out too loudly, you know what's going to happen. We've seen it already. The intimidation, the economic and political and legal intimidation. It's been well documented. So who am I to tell you that you should be more courageous or more forthright or more outspoken? It's true. It's easy for me. I'm in Vancouver, Canada. I get a lot of, people may have their opinions about me. And occasionally, as has happened, I might have a speaking engagement canceled, but I can live with that. But I don't face what you face. And if you're Jewish Israeli, and if you're a supporter of peace, and you happen to be appalled by what's happening in Gaza right now, and you speak out against it, you're also facing consequences. Economic consequences, political consequences, perhaps legal consequences, as has happened also. And the disapproval, perhaps, of your friends and your families and your communities. I can't tell you what you should be doing. But as for the trauma, it's true. There's tremendous trauma on both sides. Now, if we want to understand how to deal with trauma, first we have to understand the sources of it. That's the first point. And the sources is in a system that is dedicated to Jewish supremacy in all of former Palestine. And that traumatizes both people, but it doesn't traumatize them equally. That's the reality. If anybody doesn't know that, they haven't done their homework. That's all. They haven't visited. They haven't even read the Israeli sources that document all the oppression that's happening every day. I won't try and prove that to you right now, but if you don't know it, you haven't done your homework. Now, as to how to heal under a traumatic situation, boy, oh boy, that's a hard one because, healing has been my life's work. And sometimes I don't do very well at it personally with all the resources that I've got. But I'll tell you two things. One is the very famous Viktor Frankl, who was a young Jewish doctor in a number of Nazi camps, including Auschwitz and Buchenwald. And he's the one who said that external circumstances don't have, in his very famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. It's on my shelf here somewhere. And he's the one that pointed out, even in a concentration camp, you have a certain degree of freedom as to how to respond to the situation. Even there. Now, could I do that? I'm not so sure. But there are people who say that. And I can tell you of other cases that I know. For example, I know Black men on the death row in Texas. Now, Texas is a state that kills people regularly, especially if you're Black, especially if you're male. So yeah, I know some Black men on death row prison in Texas. Death row means they live in a cage. And regularly, and they committed a crime. They killed somebody when they were 18. They were part of a gang. They were traumatized as kids because of racism and the destruction of the Black families and drugs and all that. So they kill somebody at age 18. Then they get sentenced to death. Then they appeal, and the appeal process can take decades. So now they're in their late 30s, early 40s, living on death row with their appeal. If they win the appeal, you know what they can hope for? Life in prison without parole. That's the best hope they have. But they sent me some videos telling me how grateful they are for my work. It made a big difference to them. But that's not the main point. The main point is they love life. They write poetry. They create art that's exhibited in art galleries. They work online with children to trying to make sure that those kids don't follow their path. And they say, we're totally in love with life. What life? Life that if they win their appeal, they'll be in jail for the rest of their lives. That's justice in the United States. And I have videos on my computer. I won't take the time to show it to you. But what I'm getting at is the peace that they have in their hearts, and that's evident on their faces, in their body language, in their voice. You wouldn't believe it. You know what they've done? They've meditated. They've prayed. They worked on their traumas in death row, in a cage. I say, if they can do it, who are we to say that we can't?
Yeah. Yeah, and also thank you. That's so you're talking and Asaf, I see that you want to say something and I'll pass it immediately to you, but it's just this has been long my question, like for people living in like I don't know, it's obviously not a question to you, it's a question to the universe, like people living in Gaza, like what would their opportunity be to actually raise their head above the water and be able to do this? It seems to me like really
In
so
Gaza,
difficult, like when you're not even given the opportunity to be there since your childhood, then how can you do that?
in 2004, 2005, there was an article published in the World Journal of Psychiatry. And a very high level, this is before Hamas, there was a really high level of traumatized children in the occupied territories, particularly in Gaza. They had seen their family members killed. Let's not forget that the killing of children didn't begin on October the 7th, October the 8th. Thousands of Palestinian kids have been killed by Israeli bombs over the years. Thousands. And the world did nothing. Nothing. So there was a study. High levels of post-traumatic stress among these kids, bedwetting, nightmares, aggression, disobeying of parents, anxiety, really high levels. This is before the current horror, 20 years before. 19 years before. Now, here's what I'm sure about. In 1948, when Jewish militias committed all kinds of massacres against the Palestinians and rapes, as documented by Israeli historians, I'm pretty sure, and there were even horrible stories told by Israeli soldiers of throwing a baby into an oven, if you can believe that, in 1948. I can give you the reference if you like. I'm pretty sure that the people that committed those horrors, you know who they were? Probably the ones that were most agitated and the most hostile and the most murderous were probably Jews from Europe suffering severe PTSD. They just arrived, and now they're people that they're fighting against. And in their minds, those people that were fighting against were just like the Nazis, who just tried to exterminate them 3 years before then, or 4 or 5 years before then. Those are the people that committed those crimes, I'm pretty sure. Now, the expulsion, that was policy. In 1956, there was a massacre of men and boys, unarmed, in Gaza. Hundreds of them. An 8-year-old boy watched his uncle being killed. He became one of the founders of Hamas. In 2004 or 5, there was a study about traumatization of Palestinian children. Those young Palestinian men who streamed into Israel on October the 7th, going to their deaths, because they knew most of them were going to die. They knew it. And most of them did die. Who were they? I'm not justifying anything. I'm not justifying the massacres of 1948 either. I'm explaining them. I'm saying, where do I think it came from? Those same traumatized kids who were betting their beds in 2004 or 5. There is a child psychiatrist whose name I won't mention because I don't want to bring attention to him. But for a long time, he was the first and only child psychiatrist in Gaza. One, serving a population where half the population were children. Guess what? 10, 20, 15 years from now, there'll be a lot of Palestinian men in Gaza, unless something changes. And actually, the world and Israel has the power to change things by stopping the oppression. Unless something changes, there'll be tens of thousands of kids full of hatred, full of rage, full of desperation, full of aggression. And then we're going to say, how is this possible? How do these horrors take place? Well, just go back to 1948.
Dr. Gabor, if something does change, let's imagine like a magical world that everything shifts now. Do you think there's like
That'd be nice.
I know that would be really nice. But aren't we like beyond the point of hope?
Yeah. You feel beyond hope?
Honestly, at this point, yeah.
All right. Well, I don't deal in hope, because hope is wishing that something would happen in the future, but I don't go there. But let me read you something, okay? And this may seem strange to you, but let me read you a paragraph, okay? And I'm not talking about hope, I'm talking about possibility. This is a father writing to his son. See what you think of it. Keep your good heart. Become a person who lets himself be guided primarily by warmth and humanity. Learn to think and judge for yourself responsibly. Don't accept everything without criticism, and it is absolutely true. The biggest mistake of my life was that I believed everything faithfully, which came from the top, and I didn't dare to have the least bit of doubt about the truth of that which was presented to me. In all your undertakings, don't let your mind speak, but listen above all to the voice in your heart. Now, what do you think of that? How does that strike you?
Well, now I wonder what do you think about it, but also maybe I was
I
too.
feel like Assaf needs to say something. So go ahead.
You feel like what?
Like she feels like I need to say something. We've been working together for a few months, so Muna knows me a bit.
Well, I'm only asking, what do you think about that letter of the father to the son? What do you think of it? Listen to your heart.
I think this is
Yeah, maybe.
No, I'm going to tell you who said it, okay? You better be sitting down.
okay.
Otherwise, you'll fall over. The person who wrote those words, his name was Rudolf Höss. He was the commandant of Auschwitz. He's the one that built that death camp. And he wrote those words to his son 4 days before he was hung after his trial in Poland. And he said that what allowed him to, and he was sincere. He says what allowed him to see what crimes he had committed was the compassion that he received in a Polish prison. He said, I treated these people so terribly, and they treated me with compassion. That compassion opened his heart. 4 days later, they hung him. But what am I talking about? I'm talking about human possibility. If a monster like that, or if a human being that became as monstrous as he was, experienced the transformation of the heart, which I think he did, a few of them did, many of them did not, but he did, then that speaks to human possibility.
Thank you for that. That's amazing.
And so I don't hope. I think the situation is going to get worse. I think the occupation is going to get worse. The very best thing I can hope for is some phony Palestinian state in these little Bantustans, these little walled off little areas where the Palestinians will be given the right to collect their own garbage. Where maybe they'll be free from harassment by the settlers and the Israeli army. But it won't be anything like a real state, anything like real independence, anything like real freedom. And even that'll only happen if the American big brother forces the Israeli little brat to behave himself a little bit. Because when America whistles, Israel jumps. It's just that America doesn't whistle. And that's the best I can hope for in the short term. Otherwise, I see Israel as going more and more to the right, the occupation getting more brutal. We know that since October the 7th, something like 7,000 Palestinians in the West Bank have been jailed. Then we talk about the hostages, but they're hostages too. Children are being jailed for writing anti-occupation graffiti on a wall or posting anti-occupation messages on social media. They jail children. I think that's going to get worse. I think the settlers are going to get more arrogant. That's what's going to happen in the short term. But I believe in human possibility. I believe that in the long term, this will not sustain itself. It can't. And I think it's possible that from river to the sea, Palestine will be free for everybody, for Jew and for Palestinian. I think that's possible. Incidentally, maybe you know all this, but we keep talking about how the Hamas doesn't accept a Jewish state. Well, neither does Likud accept a Palestinian state. It's in their constitution. I'm only asking for people to be fair. Let's apply the same standard to one side as the other. And I think people are capable of doing that in the long term. If we're going to be against the killing of civilians, let's be against it. If we're going to be against the abduction of children, let's be against the abduction of children. If we're going to be against racism, let's be against racism. On all sides. You know what? I think that's what most human beings want in their heart. I actually think that's what most Israelis want in their heart. In their heart. The question is, how connected are they to their heart? I know what it's like to be cut off from my heart. Believe me, I know it. But I see a possibility there. In the long term, I see possibility. In the short term, I see misery.
I want to
You know what? Let me finish with it. Not finish, but let me add this. I don't care what your point of view is, whether you agree with me, whether you don't agree with me. Just seek the truth for yourself. Really seek it for your trouble. Question yourself. Question your assumptions. Question your identification. And Muna, there's that famous, maybe Assaf or somebody here can tell me, was it Rabbi Hillel who said that the task is not yours to finish, but neither are you free not to take part in it? The task of tikkun olam, of healing the world. I'm not gonna, I could work 24/7 for the rest of my life. It's not gonna make any difference. The world is still gonna be the world, and you and everybody on this call, we can all work 24/7. But are we free not to take part in it? So the real possibility is not just what will happen in the future, but where do we want to put our hearts right now, today? That possibility is open to us.
So I want to share something, and also to say that we're past time, but I think we'll finish soon. Just to say, maybe in my view, I think that foreseeing the future is something that I can't do, and to hope what will be in the future, I can't. But to take steps now is something which is possible for us, for human beings. Kind of as you said now. So I don't know what will I see in my life, but I know what I can do. And what you mentioned with the people on the death row, I found it. What I found for me in that story is this essence of life, that I feel that we as human beings, and this is why healing is possible, is because there is this essence of life that human beings can come in touch with, and that makes them want to live. That makes us want to live, and that has a very strong power in our life. And for me, something which is which made a big change in the last months was that in a conversation with a Palestinian friend, I noticed that I'm not as empathic to him as I am to other Israelis. And when I saw it, I saw the pain in it for me. Not the pain for him, but the pain for me. That I see another human being and I'm not feeling as empathic. And I
It's your
really
birthday,
saw it
Ari.
as my loss, and I saw it as a disease, actually. Like what came to my mind was, this is a disease of my mind and my soul. And that made me want to be free for myself and not for any other, actually. And for me, once I or us as Israelis and also Palestinians who may wish harm, like I just see how wishing harm is horrible for me. We're interbeing, we're connected so deeply. So anything which within me doesn't wish for the best of the other is actually harming myself. And once I saw it, something changed deeply in my heart, I feel. Like that's like an essence of life which is beyond identities. And I feel this is my wish for others. I was demonstrating close to Gaza with signs for ceasefire and humanity, and people were cursing us like all the time. And I deeply thought, this is a horrible state of being, to see another human being standing and demonstrating for a ceasefire and for peace, and to be mewuyam, to be like feeling that is a threat for myself. I felt this is such a horrible state of being. And that made me, and my wish was for them, maybe that sounds condescending, was kind of like, I wish you to be free. I wish your heart to be free from the pain, from the suffering, which brings you to this state of not wishing for peace, not believing that peace is possible. Like, I think we would choose that possibility if we wouldn't be hurt in a way. So it's half a prayer, I would say, for me, for us as humanity and for people of this region, and specifically for Israelis, because I do feel identified with Israelis more. So I wish for this for us, that I sit with friends and they say, wow, I didn't hear this word peace for a really long time. I feel I wish for you to believe it, like now, this moment, to believe peace is possible, healing is possible, the path is possible. I think I will stop now, and if Mona has something more, and then I think, Gabo, if you have like finishing words.
Thank you for this, Assaf. Thank you so much. I think we want to honor everyone's time. I would, unless you really have something that you want to say to what Assaf spoke, then maybe I can say a few words and then give you the stage to conclude this conversation, Dr. Mate. You're muted. Can you unmute?
All right. Yeah, so if you want to say a few words, I'll have a couple of final comments. Or do you want me to speak first, and then you can have, maybe the Palestinians should have the final word. How about that?
For a change.
instead of the Jews always having the final word, you know? So let me just say something, and then you, okay? You know, Assaf, about what you said about these people that were cursing you for your demonstration and how not free they are. So when you read the Buddhist texts and you talk about the Noble Eightfold Path and the right intention, there are three intentions. One is renunciation, which is letting go of identification and attachment. So that's one intention. The second one is goodwill towards others. Then the third one is harmlessness, and you won't hurt others. And these are not moral or ethical teachings. These are teachings for liberation. So when you wish that for those people that were cursing you, you're not being condescending. You're actually wishing for their liberation. Because you've been in that state, certainly I have, of constriction. It's not a liberated state. So there's nothing condescending about your wish. My only final comment is, we have these two languages here. You mentioned peace and how nobody said that word for a long time. Well, there used to be a movement in Israel, Shalom Achshav, peace now. It's gone, or maybe a little bit of it remains. It's been very silent. In all the demonstrations against Netanyahu last year, there was very little said about the Palestinians. But we have these two languages, Arabic and Hebrew. And how do people greet each other? Shalom, salam, shalom aleichem, salam alaikum. Albert Einstein said that if we can't make peace with the Arabs, we Jews have learned nothing in our 2,000 years of history. So yeah, peace unto all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you deeply for this. So, I just wanted to add to everything that we all spoke here, a little bit of, like, for me, what has been working. I'm not going to be long. I know that we're going to conclude in a few minutes, but just wanting to say that just like Assaf spoke about him being, like people shouting at him with me, people are also angry for working with Jewish people, and it happens all the time. And it's been really clear for me for a long time that this is what I spoke before, is that I think that we really need to get out of the stream and find a way. Because for me, like Assaf said, that we've been working together, and even me working with Assaf for a few months, I've seen his change along the way of understanding the Palestinian situation better, like since I first met him until now. And it's been happening actually. And for me, it's really core that when you find someone who's willing to do this work, to encourage that work and keep like insisting to do that. And I think that the main thing, and this is something that I keep forgetting myself, is that we're both two people here holding on very strongly to our victim consciousness. And it's so hard to just overcome that. To 1 minute, like you spoke about the people in the jail praying, loving life. It's just like a kind of like, in a way, also overcoming our ancestral trauma and really letting go of that victim and choosing to take responsibility. I think this is, like, for me, this has been the only way to work. So this is my piece of, like my piece of giving into this session here, and also kind of prayer and hope that things would work. I just hope that, it is possible for others to do that as well. And I'm aware that it's really hard for people living under certain circumstances to do that. I really want to thank you for the depth and, the obvious care that you speak with. It really touched my heart deeply. I was on verge of tears a few times. So thank you. Thank everyone for participating. Anything
Thank you
else?
very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for everybody coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.